In ancient Greece, there was a proud tradition of rhetoric, of philosophical argument, and those who were the best of it became local heroes, even national heroes. Ancient Greece was as proud of their wisdom as a good South African farmer would be of their boerewors. And the people who did well at this rhetoric became like pop stars. Rhetoric was a form of entertainment. On the other hand, the Jews were a people who were known to be proud of their cultural identity, their history, if you like, even though their history was a very difficult one. And their whole national story was moving inevitably towards the coming of a Messiah who would be victorious and glorious on their behalf. As many of us know, at the time of Jesus, the anticipation of the Messiah wasn't so much as a religious figure as it was a political figure who would come and vindicate the nation, who would retaliate against those who had oppressed and enslaved them over the centuries. The Messiah would make Israel great. And in the midst of all of this, there was Jesus. Not just Jesus, but Jesus on a cross. To the clever Greeks who were overly confident in what they thought success was, the cross was just a joke. The church father John Chrysostom said that the message of the cross to the Greeks perhaps would have sounded like a doctor who could win patients who had been burned and wounded and were desperately in need of medicine by promising to cure them not with drugs, but by burning them again. For the Greeks, which by the way is a fair representation of modern Western thought, the cross was absurd, like a burn victim being treated with more burning. It was something you would literally laugh at, you would scorn, you would deride. To the Greeks, the cross was just a cartoon, and I think that might not be untrue of modern day thinking as well. For the Jews, on the other hand, the cross was an embarrassment. Paul, I think rather politely, kindly, even euphemistically, talks about the cross as a stumbling block. It sounds a bit innocuous. But when Jesus was about 3 years old, the Roman governor Varus crucified 2,000 Jewish rebels who had protested Rome's harsh rule and high taxation. Rome used crucifixion as a warning. The Jewish people were well acquainted with the cross. The cross of Jesus wasn't the first one they had heard of. The cross had marked their history, and it was intended to demean those who were being executed, not just to kill them, but to demean them in the process. And the extremity of the cruelty in the process of crucifixion was a blatant show of force. It was a reminder that anyone could be squashed like a bug. But on top of all of that, the Torah, the law, in Deuteronomy 21:23 said, anyone hung on a tree is under God's curse. So when you think about it, it is entirely understandable that to any Jewish person educated in the ways of their nation and in the ways of their faith, that whoever this person was that was hanging on the cross, this was not someone who could reasonably be considered as Israel's Messiah. So it's fascinating when Paul writes, Jews demand signs, in other words, they want power, and Greeks desire wisdom, but we proclaim Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. So I asked myself the question, maybe you too, why the cross? Why would God use something which is a joke to the Gentiles and offensive to the Jews, which really kind of sums up the world's population? Why would God use this thing that created offense and ridicule? And I think there's really only one possible answer. And even as I say it, I suppose it feels a bit impossible. I mean, could it be true? I think it is true. The reason that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us on a cross is because from the day we were born, from the day you and I were born, the reality is that we have been lied to. It does feel a bit impossible to believe that, but it's true. From the day we were born, we have been lied to. Let me tell you what I mean. I can't use every example of it, but let me just pick one. We've been told, for example, that might is right. I remember vividly that day that those planes flew into the Twin Towers in New York City. I'm sure you remember it too. And I also remember that one of my first responses to that, and I'm interested that I can recall that, I just remember thinking at the time, I cannot imagine what America will do to the people who did this to them. And I confess that some part of me actually looked forward to seeing exactly what it was America would do to avenge this atrocity on their nation. But we knew, the world knew, someone was going to pay for September the 11th, because the way of the world is that we meet violence with violence. It's the essential premise, for example, of the death penalty. It's an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Its might is always right. In our world, greatness is measured with various measuring sticks, not just with might. We measure someone's greatness by their wealth, or by their accomplishments, or by their success, or by their fame, or by their power, or by their titles. It's quite big in the church, by the way. Or by their now unbelievably so, by the likes and followers that someone can have on social media. That's a genuine status symbol in today's world. And it's all a house of cards. It's all a lie. It's all a fabrication. It's not really true. And that's why the cross. Because the cross stands in opposition, not to everything, but to almost everything that we are told matters in this world. The way of the cross is not some alternate reality that the scriptures ask us to follow. The way of the cross is reality. The way of the cross is how life works. This is how God has structured the universe. When we live in the way of the cross, life is found. Life is the ultimate consequence of walking in the way of the cross. It's the wonderful twist of the gospel. And the rest is just an illusion. It's a lie. It's a house of cards. So when Paul writes and says, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God, he means it. He means it. He says, if you want to see true power, if you want to see true wisdom at work in the world, then follow the way of the cross. I mean, think about it. Imagine hanging on a Roman cross, being entirely innocent, being spat upon, mocked, and being beaten to within an inch of your life. And we often forget that that's what happened to Jesus, beaten to within an inch of his life. The soldiers gathered around like indifferent vultures. His life didn't matter to them. And while they are standing around indifferently, mockingly at the foot of his cross, imagine being able to say these words. Imagine being able to pray these words. Imagine being able to speak these words over these people around you, your executioners. Imagine being able to say, Father, Father, forgive them. Forgive them. If you want to know what power and wisdom really look like, that's it. That's it. The bombs and the nooses and the missiles and the electric chairs, they're an aberration of what we believe power to be. That's force, to be sure, and it's force to be reckoned with. It's real in our world, but it's not true power. We watched a show on BBC recently called The Victim, and I must say to you, if you intend watching it, you need to pause now. This is a spoiler alert. You need to pause the sermon, go watch the series, and come back and finish watching the sermon another day. But it's the story, The Victim is the story of a young boy who is murdered, and it's the mother's determination to exact revenge on the killer of her son. And in this closing dramatic scene, the boy's father, the woman's husband, has the opportunity to kill their son's murderer. But instead, as the father approaches the killer with a knife, the mother steps in front of the murderer, and in doing so, protects the life of the man who killed her son. The mother protects the life of the man who killed her son. It's dramatic. And I wonder why a storyline like that is so powerful. I wonder why it moves us so deeply. I wonder why, for many of us, it leaves us amazed that anyone could do something like that. Even if it's a fictitious story, I wonder why it has that impact. Why does it provoke things in us? Why has that story lingered with me until now? What is it about that kind of a story that connects with us as people? And the answer is simple. It's because in the end, even if it's a fictitious story on BBC, in the end, that story is a witness to the power and the wisdom of the cross. And you will find the power and the wisdom of the cross at work all over our world. Wherever people choose to serve instead of being served, it's the power of the cross. Where people choose to be givers instead of takers, it's the power of the cross. Where those who choose to suffer with others who mourn or are in suffering, that's the power of the cross. Those who choose to forgive the unimaginable or even what we would regard as the unforgivable, that's the power of the cross. Wherever people love each other in mutual submission, that's the power of the cross. Where truth is spoken amongst one another, that's the power of the cross. And where faith is kept, even in the darkest of hours, then that's the power of the cross. And so Paul writes these words. They are not words of judgment, they just are truth. He says the message about the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, to those who believe the lie. It's just a joke. But to us who are being saved, it is the power of God.